Hi third graders, I'm here with another lesson for you. This lesson is on Helena history, and sadly I'm not going to be able to do the walking tours that I normally do with you this year. So I wanted you to have a little Helena history since you're not going to get the opportunity to get out on the streets with me and explore Helena history firsthand. So I've attached a video to this, which is a walking tour that is normally what we will do, and then also a history, a timeline of Helena. After you're done watching this video, I'd love it if you would just jot down 3 things you learn, 3 facts that you will remember from this video. Sometimes when we do things like that, we truly do remember it. Sorry I can't have this experience with you, but I hope you enjoy this presentation. This is the great story of Helena, Montana. The first steamship, called the Yellowstone, 2 million years ago, there were big changes in the temperature that affected the landscape of what would become Helena, Montana. 4 different times there were ice ages that caused great sheets of glacial ice to move down from Canada and cover Montana completely. The last glacier retreat was 10,000 years ago, and it carved out a lot of the Montana landscape. The first humans probably came to Montana across the Bering Strait, following the mammoth and the buffalo herds. They gathered plants and believed that the earth was sacred. There is a strong evidence of a thriving group of people living in the northern Rocky Mountains as early as 9,000 years ago. American Indians were in the Montana region at the time that the first Europeans explored it. These tribes include the Blackfoot, the Sioux, the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, the Kootenai, and the Salish. When the first white traders got to Montana, there might have been as many as 15,000 members of the Blackfeet Nation living in the Montana area. Their contact with the white traders and introduction of guns and horses changed these people forever. They became dependent on trade with white people for their existence. By using horses for hunting, they also became very efficient hunters of the bison. Much of this region was bought by France as part of the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. In 1804, now we'll get started with the timeline. In 1804, President Thomas Jefferson sent Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to explore this area. The Lewis and Clark expedition left May 1804 from St. Louis, Missouri, and passed through Montana during the years of 1805 to 1806. The purpose of their journey was to explore and map the newly acquired part of the country after the Louisiana Purchase. They were also sent to try to find a practical route across the western half of the United States of the Northern American continent. Meriwether Lewis and his close friend William Clark were also sent to study the area's plants and wildlife and try to establish trade with the American Indian tribes. The first steamship, called the Yellowstone, traveled on its first round-trip voyage from St. Louis, Missouri to Fort Union in 1832. Fort Union was established by the American Fur Company on the Missouri River, near where it joins the Yellowstone River. Fort Union was most important as a fur trading post on the upper Missouri River. It was a huge thing in the development for the fur trade of what would become Montana. In September of 1841, a Jesuit priest named Pierre Jean de Schmidt arrived in the Bitterroot Valley and established the first permanent settlement in what would become Montana's St. Mary's Mission. It was designed as a village for Catholic Salish Indians. This settlement later became Stevensville, Montana. You guys, you can visit that. It's a really neat place to go. Auguste Chateau and Pierre Chateau Jr. established Fort Benton in 1847 as a military and trading post on the upper Missouri River. It became world-renowned as the head of navigation to the west and the world's furthest inland post. Fort Benton was a major economic center and port. For 30 years, steamships carried settlers, supplies, gold miners, and merchants up the Missouri River. It connected some of the great East Coast cities to Montana. Fort Benton is the oldest continuously populated town in all of Montana. In 1862, gold was discovered in Grasshopper Creek. Thousands of prospectors flooded into Montana following this gold strike. This created the boom town of Bannack, Montana. After this gold strike, many California gold miners came to the area in search of America's next great gold strike. The mining camps of Diamond City and Virginia City were nearby mining camps that were lawless, wild places. Citizens sometimes had to take the law into their own hands. They were called the vigilantes. Many outlaws were either hung or driven from Montana areas by the vigilantes. Sidney Edgerton, look at that guy, was the official from Idaho, and he saw a need for better government in these wild mining camps and wrote to Washington, D.C., asking them to create a new territory. Montana became an official United States territory of May of 1864, and because Sidney had spoken up, he became its first governor. This is an important day. July 14th, 1864. Gold was discovered by the four Georgians. They were not all from Georgia, but they were practicing a Georgian style of mining. They found gold in Prickly Pear Creek on Last Chance Gulch. They weren't all from Georgia. They practiced a Georgian style of mining. The four Georgians went on to Virginia City and they used their gold dust as money. Prospectors noticed that the gold looked a little different from what they were finding in Grasshopper Creek. And when the four Georgians returned to Last Chance Gulch later that summer, they were unknowingly followed by hundreds of prospectors. News traveled quickly, and over 1,000 miners were at this gold camp by that fall. The town of Helena was first called Crab Town, after one of the four Georgians. And later that fall, it came to a vote, and the name Helena was chosen, since many of the miners came from St. Helena, Minnesota. In the early days of Helena history, there were many huge fires that ravaged the city of Helena. Miners used wooden building materials that were very closely built together to preserve space for their mining claims. This way of building provided perfect kindling for fires that would wipe out most of the central business district and most of the homes. The first fire tower was built in the early 1870s to guard the gulch. It had an iron triangle to sound the alarm if fire was spotted on the gulch. It was also used as a curfew bell for the kids to come in for supper. After the boom of Helena, gold in other towns started to peter out. Miners from nearby mining towns all came to Helena. And in 1875, it was decided to move the territorial capital from Virginia City to Helena. This was a fatal move for Virginia City, and it would decline to nearly a ghost town after the gold ran out. When the Northern Pacific Railroad came to Helena, it was a big deal. Miners from nearby mining towns all came to Helena. People hiked Mount Helena bringing with them picnic lunches in order to glimpse the first smoke rising from the steam engine that probably came from over by East Helena. When people first saw the train approaching, a cry of joy and applause went up through the town. The railroad meant survival for this little mining town. Now people could travel to see their families on the East Coast in much less time. Until then, mules and even camels had carried supplies from Fort Benton that had been shipped along the Missouri River. Also, supplies were freighted overland on the Montana Trail all the way from Corinne, Utah, 400 miles south of Helena. After the railroad arrived, building materials such as brick could be shipped by train, which changed the whole face of Helena and prevented the town from burning to the ground like it did so many times in the 1870s. In August of 1889, it was an important time in Helena history, since it was when the luxury Broadwater Hotel and Natorium opened, the city's westerly outskirts, over by where the Broadwater is now. This was a hotel like no other. With opulence around every corner, it had its first ever indoor swimming pool. It had the first indoor swimming pool, the biggest one on the planet. However, it never managed to make great profits, and it eventually closed for good in 1941, following slow business and earthquake damage. On November 8th, 1889, Montana became the 41st state in the United States of America, and Helena became the capital city. It had to fight hard to keep its capital city status, though. In 1894, a fight erupted over the state capital between Helena and Anaconda, Montana, and by popular vote, Helena kept its status as the capital city of Montana. Construction on the Capitol building began in 1896, and the building was completed in 1902. President Theodore Roosevelt came to Helena to dedicate the building in 1903 and spoke from the steps of the Capitol. A large dog approached the president while he was speaking. His security officers tried to remove the dog, but the president instead insisted the dog be able to stay at his side as he scratched his head and finished his speech. October 1935. Helena suffered 3 large earthquakes in this month. The largest measured 6.3 on the Richter scale. The town was devastated by these 3 earthquakes, and by the 3rd earthquake in a row, some residents decided to move away. 4 people died during the earthquakes, and property damage is estimated at $4 million. Over 1,800 tremors were felt in Helena between October 1935 and April 1936. The 1970s saw urban renewal in Helena, Montana. Many lower-income areas in Helena's South Main Street area were destroyed. Most of its Chinatown and Victorian area structures were destroyed, and more than 430 families had to find other places to live. After the demolition, some government buildings and a new library were erected in the historic district. The city also added some green space with city parks. The name Main Street was changed to Last Chance Gulch to attract tourists and was closed off to motor vehicles to create our walking mall. Helena, Montana is now a beautiful city in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. It has lots of opportunities for outdoor enthusiasts, and it attracts many tourists from all around the world. It is the 6th largest city in all of Montana. It still has some of the ornate Victorian architecture and beautiful mansions that remind us of the 20 years when over $3.6 billion of gold was extracted from this area.